Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. For me, I'm right now sitting in Brussels, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you to the launch of the Greens EFA, so the Greens in the European Parliament website, Spyware Files. We as Greens in the European Parliament, together with other political groups, are already working for many years on the issue of misuse of spyware against journalists, political activists, human rights defenders. We have since 8 months now the inquiry committee on the misuse of spyware inside the European Union in the European Parliament. But those of you who are following the issue of spyware for longer term know that spyware has been misused already before the last 8 months, but for many years before. And it has been misused not only in the European Union, but in many countries around the world and with very detrimental effects. We know about this misuse not because democratic control structures work, not because governments come clean. We only know about this misuse because investigative journalists and amazing civil society organizations detected this misuse, documented it, and made it public. But so far, the information about the misuse was a bit scattered. So there were revelations on Spain, there were revelations on Mexico, there were revelations on Morocco. But taking all these pieces of the puzzle together, we can actually see how encompassing, how global the problem and the misuse is. And also often the focus was on the companies, be it NSO, be it Fisher, or others that produce this commercial spyware, and not so much on the victims, the people who really bear the brunt, who sometimes end up in prison, who are harassed, who are intimidated, whose privacy is fundamentally violated by this kind of spyware. And that is something that we wanted to change a bit with our website, our new project called Spyware Files. What are we going to do today in the next hour? First of all, I want to briefly present you the just right now launched website spywarefiles.eu, but I also want to discuss the misuse of spyware with a few guests that will join me after a short presentation of the website. With Nancy Awad De Michele from Frontline Defenders, an organization that since the very beginning has been supporting human rights defenders that are being surveyed or that are afraid that they are being surveyed. By Ron Ebert, who is the professor of political science at the University of Toronto, and much more important, the founder of Citizens Lab, one of these research institutes that helps to uncover the misuse of spyware. And then also by Hala Ahedib, one of the women's human rights defenders that has actually been a victim of the misuse of spyware. But before I bring all these panelists into the picture, allow me to briefly run you through the website. And I'm now going to share my screen. And I hope it's also going to, yes. So now you see it. I prepared something for you. So I already typed in the domain Spyware Files EU. And what you see is welcome to Spyware Files, which is the collection of all the documents, of all the files that have been done, collected, researched, brought to the public by a number of civil society and research organizations. And we have tried to display them on a world map, and of course added the display of these cases with the Q&A about spyware, about the political problems behind that, and all of that. And as I told you, this is a project of the Greens in the European Parliament. And you see actually three of us featured here as we have different roles in the Pegasus Inquiry Committee, but also in the European Parliament. You see my very dear colleague, Diana Riba from Spain, who was herself a victim of spyware, being spied upon by the Spanish government while she was a member of the European Parliament for apparently political reasons. Well, then you see me. I'm, among others, the vice chair of the Human Rights Committee. So I have been for a long time focusing especially on the attacks of spyware against human rights defenders in third countries. And then you see here my dear colleague Saskia Brigmont from Belgium, who is our coordinator in the Pegasus Inquiry Committee and who focuses for a long time on the misuse of spyware inside the European Union, starting with the cases of, well, Hungary and Poland, but then complemented with cases that we know about now from Greece and Spain. And what we tried to do is to bring all the findings that we have around the case together in one interactive world map. How it works, well, it's briefly explained on the website and what we're trying to do with it. First of all, we want to show that the misuse of spyware is not confined to repressive regimes, but it also occurs in European democracies. We want to show that it's not a regional problem, but it's really a global problem. We want to show that persons from all walks of life have been targeted, in particular government critics. And we want to show that the revelations of spyware misuse demonstrates that we really need urgent political action to stop this. And I think we will also have some time in our discussion today to address these issues. The map that you will see in a second includes more than 260 named persons targeted by authorities from 20 different countries. Most of these cases, as I said, are based on the research conducted by Citizens Lab and Amnesty Tech and additionals. The map does not include, and I want to be very transparent about that, the map does not include the tens of thousands incidents where, for example, phone numbers were identified in leaks. The map only includes verified cases where the name of the victim is public and we have a long scientific documentation. And also cases where the victims are victims of commercial spyware. So you will see, for example, in a second on the map that China is not part of the projects of spyware files as we have it now, because there we see mainly a misuse of government spyware, and we don't have this kind of revelations where we see individual victims. The map is organized itself along three categories: the countries involved, the profile of victims, and the type of software used. And we have two maps. So you can choose between the two maps, and now you're going to see the heart of our website. One is looking at the spying countries. So which countries are exposed to having misused the spyware on individuals? And then you can have a look at the profile of the victims. I'm going to do that live with you in a second. And the second map looks at countries involved as either exporting countries, as client countries, and along the types of spyware. And you can always filter. So now we have the first map, as I said, countries abusing spyware. You can either select a country in the drop-down menu here, where we have verified knowledge that they have misused spyware. You can just scroll over the countries so you get an understanding of how big the revelations are. In case of Spanish, for example, quite huge. In the case of Kazakhstan, a bit less known cases. So you can just scroll over the countries. And if you want to have more information, maybe we're just going to take Saudi Arabia. You can click on the country, and then you can see the kind of, victims. So was it a journalist, an activist? Was it a relative of one of those? You have the named cases. You can scroll down. And then in an external source, you basically find the original information provided by the Institute as we collected it and brought it together in the database. The second country we have, as I said, the second map we have is about the misuse of spyware along export and client countries. So here, for example, Kazakhstan, we know they have acquired Hermit and Pegasus. France, Cerebro. In Spain, we know that there has been a use of Condiru and Pegasus. And this is also then to get more information and the source, it works along the same way. Well, right. That's kind of bringing together the research information, gathering it, and clearly showing what a global, huge problem the misuse of spyware, of commercial spyware is. But we are politicians, so we are not going to leave it to that, which is why, for one, we included just a Q&A explaining what the problem actually is. What is surveillance software? What is the problem with the misuse and so on? Feel free to click through it. the usual pattern. But then we also formulated a number of recommendations. So what needs to be done politically to stop this? And we also have a few suggestions on how you can take action, including also some information about what you can do if you think that spyware, surveillance spyware, is used on your phone. And that is also something we can discuss all together. And that's basically the quick overview of the website Spyware Files, as we, as the Greens, have now programmed it together with the amazing website developers. And I really want to mention that ADMK, Agency for Design and Multimedia Concepts in Cologne, because they've really took an extra effort to make this very appealing and very fun to watch, with some Easter eggs hidden here and there. And yes, it was an amazing cooperation. So thanks to you guys as well. And now I would actually like to bring in the panelists as they are present already now. And all of you who want to dig a bit deeper into the software, you can do that surely while listening to us under spywarefiles.eu. So my first guest for tonight, and I really want to start a bit with the victim's perspective, is Nancy Awad-Demicheli, who works as the MENA Protection Coordinator at Frontline Defenders and has been supporting civil society organizations and defenders in the Middle East and North Africa for 13 years. Nancy, you have a bit of a weird sound because I hear a lot of noise. Is there? Well, first of all, welcome, Nancy. But then is there something you can do about this sound? Maybe there's something next to you listening, someone next to you listening to the program on loudspeakers. Is that maybe possible? So maybe the other person can, yeah. Nancy, now I can't hear you. So maybe whoever sits next to you can mute their device.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but I hear a lot of feedback noise because I think Hala is sitting next to you and she's having loud, so it kind of does a
Have the phone on. We are using the same.
Now it's better. Okay, so Nancy, welcome to the discussion. Thank you for being with us here today. And maybe the first question going to you, Nancy, is when did Frontline Defenders start working on spyware against human rights defenders? So when was it the first time that you became aware of this problem?
Okay, so Frontline Defenders work on supporting defenders in the world, and working on spyware is not something new. We've been doing that since 2004. But of course, the last few years, we've been using phones much more, and also social media, so the threats have been becoming bigger. And so we do trainings normally to a lot of defenders in the MENA on digital trainings. And our team, the digital team, normally always have been supporting defender on this. But last year, we were contacted by, in October, by a Palestinian organization who had a suspicion about the phone of one of the staff members. And so we did an investigation. And the investigation started in October last year. And the day we had the meeting with them was also the day the investigation run the first time, and it was then verified by Citizen Lab and Amnesty Security Lab. So that was it wasn't the first investigation. It was the first investigation where we decided to go forward. We decided during a meeting with Al-Haq, which was one of the organizations that contacted us, to first do an investigation for the phone and then include more organization around to see if there were more organization targeted. And a few days after this meeting that took place, the 15th of October, the decision, the Israelis took a decision to actually consider those organizations as terror organizations. So here we also see that threats, generally surveillance is part of a bigger picture. It's not in itself. It's part of the threats that can, that human rights defenders do have to deal with.
And Nancy, so you mentioned that you became aware of this bigger misuse, for example, with Pegasus about 1.5 years ago. But what does it mean to human rights defenders? I mean, of course, so someone is reading what they do in their phones, but what are the effects it has? What are the threats this means for human rights defenders?
I mean, what I have seen the last year and a half, because we've been working with a lot of defenders, and as you can imagine, the report that came out had a lot of visibility. So since, of course, a lot of defenders are coming back to us to check their phones, and it's like, generally, the effect is very mental. You isolate yourself. You stop talking. You no longer trust people around you. It's as if someone break into your house. It's like the Pegasus. It accesses your files. It accesses your contacts. It accesses your pictures. So it's about your intimacy. It's about your network. It's about your contact. They also access the microphone. They know everything you're doing, who you're talking to. They get an access to your life fully. And this is something extremely scary for defenders. And I think we'll hear later on from the perspective of a defender how that is dealt with. Of course, women human rights defenders have a different impact from human rights defenders, also in the MENA specifically, because what happens is that very often the families wants to protect the women and therefore put even more pressure on them to stop the work. So, and actually part of it is about silencing defenders and stopping them from their work. That's the aim of using this kind of spyware as well.
Thank you, Nancy. One last question maybe to you. When a defender comes to you and thinks that there is surveillance on their phone or in any other way, what is the kind of support that frontline defenders provides to them? And if someone is watching us now who thinks maybe this happened to me, what can they do?
So actually, when you contact, we've had a lot of people, as I was saying, after the 3 reports that came out last year, defenders would contact us and ask us to check their phones, which we can do. I mean, there are different services, because the impact of the problem we have today is that the defenders need support. We do different kind of support. So the reports we came out with were part of the support in terms of visibility. Visibility is what also we're doing today, talking about it and saying that, what's happening to those people and the impact of this kind of spyware. This is very important. We have something also, the mental health. You can get a grant at Frontline Defenders when you need some help with your mental health. I mean, the impact of the spyware on mental health is enormous. And I think we shouldn't, people are really it's kind of a traumatic experience to have a spyware on your phone, because it feels like your life, you don't own your life anymore. Someone else is controlling your life and can be using your phone to do things, and you're not aware and when they will be using this against you. So it's something extremely difficult to live with, and to kind of continue your life become an issue. So it's very important to have people around you to support you in this and not to stay alone. I mean, of course, once we have done the check, we have we can also have a grant to make people change their phones because they can't keep the phones they have. There is the mental health part, as I was saying before. But there is also the whole protection part. How do I, as a defender, continue my work? What is the things I need to do in order to continue and still to be protected? So there is a lot of training that needs to take place. But what is very difficult is that it's actually we need governments and we need the EU and we need authorities to help us take care of this, because it's not something we as ourselves can only handle by ourselves. And this is why we are here today as well, to convey the message that it's something the society needs to take care of and to be aware of the danger of it and the harm it's doing to people.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And just if now someone's watching this program and thinks maybe they have this surveillance on their phone and they kind of support, how can they get in touch with you?
I think on our you have the possibility to go on our website, on Frontlines Defenders website, and you can send a message to info, and it will be received and it will be sent, because we work on different regions. So depending on where the person comes from, it will be sent to different region to handle, because we have digital coordinators in each region. So depending on the language you speak, so someone will respond to you in Spanish or in Arabic or in French, or depending on what your need is. We also have emergency number if you need to contact us.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I think that's very helpful, because indeed we as politics or society need to take care of the bigger problem. But in the meantime, it's key that those who feel afraid that they are being targeted also have a way and place to turn to. I would now like to bring in Ron Dybert into the discussion. Yeah, hi Ron. Nice to see you, and thank you for stepping in for John. I think we can.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, Ron. Ron, because you're the director of Citizens Lab, and we heard already a lot about Citizens Lab, especially that you are the one helping people to detect if they are being spied upon on their phone. And I had my phone basically verified with you guys as well. Why did you start Citizens Lab?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and congratulations to you and your team for putting together this website. I think it's extremely valuable to have a database effectively where people can go and look at all of the many cases. So I really appreciate your effort in that regard. So I founded the Citizen Lab 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, actually, in 2001. And we are a university-based research group. So we have for many years done very careful evidence-based research on digital security issues that arise out of human rights concerns. And starting in the late 2000s, actually, many years ago now in internet time, we started tracking cyber espionage. And the first few reports that we published were about governments that were using mostly in-house capabilities. Starting after the Arab Spring, we started to notice the emergence of the mercenary spyware industry, and we started doing investigations involving targeted espionage against activists and human rights defenders back in 2011. So it's important to recognize that this is not a new market. It's something that has been growing for quite some time. Our objective is to be as precise as possible. We have a very talented team of forensics experts and engineers who have over time developed a series, a suite, if you will, of methods and tools to identify forensically whether a device has been hacked or not, whether it's been used, whether it's been hacked with a particular spyware technology, Pegasus or another one. And we've also really developed an expertise around doing network tracking and network monitoring. And by that, I mean analyzing the infrastructure that is used by the spyware vendors to deliver their services to their government clients, even though they try to obfuscate and hide their infrastructure for operational reasons. Even the most advanced spyware companies leave digital traces that you can find. So our role in this area has been to do very careful evidence-based research. We produced the first report on Pegasus back in 2016 when we received a couple of suspicious links that were sent to Ahmad Mansour, a human rights defender in the United Arab Emirates, who unfortunately now is in prison. And since that time, we've seen dozens of victims around the world, including Nancy and other folks that you've been speaking to. The way I characterize it is it's truly a pandemic of another sort that we're facing here. You have almost entirely unregulated marketplace for some of the most sophisticated means of surveillance that are truly unprecedented in human history. And then government clients that are either democratically challenged, have poor oversight over their security agencies, as seems to be the case in many European countries and in North America for that matter, or they are autocratic or authoritarian regimes. And that combination is creating the abuses that we observe worldwide. Truly a pandemic of spyware abuses that really, I believe, threatens the core of liberal democracy, which is why I'm so excited that you're launching this initiative. And thank you for your efforts at the Pegasus Committee in Europe.
Thank you, Ron. And all of the work that we are doing now in the Pegasus Committee clearly wouldn't have been possible without you proving that this kind of misuse of spyware is happening. Because until today, I mean, we try to invite these governments or these secret services to tell us or to tell the victims if their phone has been infected or not. And until today, they refuse to do that. So it's exactly the evidence-based way that you use that helps us to say, okay, for us, that's verified information. If you think it's different, bring us your proofs, bring us your assessments. But as I said, as a word of caution when I presented the map and the website, we only really put into the map and the website the cases where we have like the verification, where we have the names, and also the victims agreed to be publicly known, which I also know is an important step. But Ron, moving a step back from the work you guys do also with the networking techniques and all of that, how big do you think the problem is in terms of how many countries, how many victims, even also if we include authoritarian regimes having their own kind of spyware like the Chinese and others?
The problem is huge and the problem is growing. So first of all, what we are seeing at the Citizen Lab and what our colleagues at Amnesty Tech are able to document and what investigative journalists are able to surface through leaked contracts or sources that they have is merely the tip of an iceberg. So we are well aware, although we don't have primary evidence for it, that there are other vendors in this space. First of all, I should say, if you just look at Citizen Lab's research, we have done reports on probably about 7 or 8 different vendors going back to 2011. And the first reports we did on Hacking Team and FinFisher. There's, of course, Pegasus, Predator in Greece, and Candiru, you mentioned, in Spain, Quadream, Cyberbit, Cytrucks. There are many, many vendors in this space. And it's a very lucrative industry. There are a lot of people making a lot of money off of the industry. Why is that significant? Because usually when there are large amounts of money involved in secretive sectors of the economy, you tend also to have corruption. And so as a consequence, we're seeing a lot of, the typical employment of techniques that are used by money launderers, frankly, to hide the origins of business transactions and contracts, very common in the space. The reason that's important is it's difficult to pierce through these veils of secrecy and obfuscation to find out exactly what's going on. And as you said quite rightly, governments, even liberal democratic governments, are and have been traditionally very reluctant to speak about operations in this area. You're talking about the most sensitive aspects of a government's operations involving espionage or signals intelligence. You mentioned China. up until now, what we have observed from China, which by the way is very active when it comes to cyber espionage, just yesterday there was a report about another China-based espionage operation targeting Amnesty International Canada. We've known for many, many years that they are targeting civil society in the same manner that customers of Pegasus are. At some point, no doubt, we will start to see Chinese vendors of mercenary surveillance technologies, which means that the challenges around imposing some kind of restraint mechanisms or regulatory structure around this industry are going to become very, very large indeed in the years to come once those companies enter the marketplace, which is why it's so important to do the type of things that you and your colleagues are doing at the European Parliament right now, which is to try to get ahead and make sure, at least in those jurisdictions and regions where we can hope to have the rule of law mean something, that we bring some accountability and transparency to this space.
Thank you, Ron, and I may also share a few information on the committee later on, but I see that Hala is now sitting next to Nancy. Okay, so it's the two of you in one screen. That's nice. So let's bring in Hala and let's see if the sound has improved. Slightly. Yeah. I can hear you, but we still hear a lot of interference. But let me quickly introduce you just for everyone, because I mean, we know each other, Hala, but not everyone knows you. So Hala Ahedib is her full name, is a human rights lawyer from Jordan who has worked with a lot of civil society organizations to defend especially the rights of women workers and the freedom of opinion, expression, and peaceful assembly. And well, because of the work you do, Hala, apparently you have been targeted with spyware. It has been, there's proof that you have been targeted, and you have also been public about that. So Hala's case is, for example, one that everyone can find on the world map that we just published. And I just want to share one testimony, Hala, that you made, or part of testimony that you made of what it did to you to be surveyed by spyware. Today, I feel isolated, you said. I do not communicate with my friends, and I avoid talking on the phone as much as I can. And for people of my generation, I mean, being on the phone is basically 9 hours a day of being awake. So if you try to prevent that, you kind of cut away half of your life and all of your friends, especially in times of COVID. I practice a kind of self-censorship sometimes when I wonder what behaviors would provoke those who hacked my phone. So that is the effect that it has on victims. And Hala, I'm very happy for my work that you are one of those who became public and who shares what happens and what it does to victims, because that is how we can raise awareness and hopefully reach some change. So maybe Hala, if you just want to briefly share with us under what conditions you have inspired, what else happened.
Actually, I think because I was worked closely to teacher syndicate and prisoner of consciousness and difficult issues in Jordan, I think this was the reason why my phone was hacked. Even in the period, my phone was hacked on March 2021. That time I was worked closely to teacher syndicate and agriculture trade unions. So I received an email from frontline defendants. They said that they have information that my phones in Jordan were hacked by Pegasus, and they asked me if I want to check my phone with other human rights defenders. Then I asked them to check my phone while I didn't um, I was surprised actually. I said, okay, I will examine my phone, but of course I'm a human rights defender and my work is in public and nothing to hide. So I don't think that my phone was surveilled or spied on. But I was shocked when I heard that my phone was hacked by Pegasus, and these results were verified by Access Now and Citizen Lab and Amnesty International.
And what were the consequences for your human rights work, for example? I assume you were, for example, afraid that if you communicate, they would get the other people's information, contacts from your other colleagues. So how did that change the kind of work on women's rights that you have been doing before?
You know, the space for civil society in Jordan is shrinked more and more also. It's very limited. So sometimes because we don't have the right to demonstrate, to go and even in meeting, it's not always allowed. So always we go virtual, we go online to have these meetings and to prepare for advocacy work or even to contact the people who we are defend. So their information is on my phone. What we are talking about is on my phone. So the one who hacked my phone, he's on joining our meeting. Listen to everything. Have this information. Also, I'm dealing with women's victims who have sensitive information. Also, we deal with and talk about. And even for myself, to be a human rights defender and a lawyer, it's supposed to defend people and to protect them, to protect my family, to protect the people who I defend. But now I put them in danger. When who spied on my phone, by this way I put the people who I'm dealing with, put them in danger. So also when I go public, when I went public, the people supported me in general, but also they feel that I am now a threat. They don't want to contact me or to deal with me over phone. We need to go in private meeting, not on phone. So this is make our space more and more limited.
So you just simply cannot do any longer the work you have been doing before because you have been spied upon, so people are afraid to contact you, and also you are afraid to contact people and to connect. Tell me, Hala, what has been the reaction of the Jordanian government after you exposed that you have been spied upon, and most likely by them?
Actually, they were silenced. They didn't respond to what happened. They didn't even, although the parliamentarian in Jordan asked them, send them questions to tell them who spied on my phone. They said we don't know whom, but maybe the Israelis, maybe the United Arab Emirates, and also they said she's lying. This is not complete information, and we couldn't say that we couldn't confirm that her phone was hacked.
Thank you, Hala. And maybe on, because that's something we observe so often. I mean, even in the European context, victims say we have been spied upon. Citizens Lab says we can verify that they have been spied upon, and still governments tell us, but they are just lying. What is your response to that? What do you do about that? How do your methods work?
Well, this is very common, and part of the problem has to do with the limitations of some of the analysis that can be done. So, pardon the gruesome metaphor, but if you're a crime scene investigator and you're going into a murder scene, you can verify that a person was murdered. You can say, yes, they were killed with this gun, but it's often far more challenging to say who pulled the trigger. That's where attribution becomes a difficult question. And so often it is the case that we're relying on various levels of circumstantial evidence. So for example, you have a victim that's of interest to this particular country. We know that that country has a security agency that maybe there's some documentation around a contract or a purchase order with a particular vendor. And then adding to that, we might have some visibility into the network infrastructure of the spyware vendor that seems to suggest there is a particular government client in a particular country. Beyond that point, though, it's very difficult to say who pressed the button, who gave the order to send the spyware and infect the phone, because this is something that's happening behind the scenes. And that's where the limits of the research, frankly, come into play, and where public accountability. So that's where we need hearings like the PEGA committee. But of course, for that to succeed, you need governments to cooperate. If you look at the case of Spain, what I found most noteworthy there was how limited and flawed public accountability has been since the revelations. So we had a partial admission of culpability from the head of Spain's National Intelligence Agency, and then the person was abruptly terminated from her position. But that's it. We don't know anything else about who ordered this spying, under what authority, if any, it was undertaken, because the government of Spain seems reluctant to actually initiate a process, which I think is desperately needed in that country, around accountability. In order to answer these questions, we really need proper independent oversight bodies, which in many countries simply don't exist. Many countries have dealt with security problems like this behind closed doors. Security agencies that do the surveillance often have very little, if any, oversight around them. That's very common around the world. Even in my own country, in Canada, we have problems with our law enforcement and their use of spyware. So collectively, those of us who care about civil liberties, the rule of law, and human rights need to work very aggressively on building in restraint mechanisms where they are absent today. And again, I hope that your process that you're starting here will help in that regard.
Ron, I can clearly pick up from there, and I promised everyone that I would also share a bit of where we are in the Pegasus Committee right now, because I know a lot of people are looking at the processes that they happen. I guess what we can constat after 8 months of investigations that have been limited because many didn't want to cooperate with us, is that even in the European Union, and I mean, that's not some kind of authoritarian regime, that's kind of the beacon, or at least is prides itself for being the beacon of democracy and rule of law, we have seen a massive misuse of spyware being used against politicians, against journalists, just as it happens in other authoritarian countries. And apparently even our own legal frameworks could not prevent this. So that's the first thing. We have legal frameworks. We usually try to adhere to these legal frameworks, but they could not prevent disorders and this use from happening. Also, and Ron just alluded to that, the democratic control structures, for example, special committees with members of parliament in it, or civil society oversight, or whatever they could look like in different national contexts, where or are until today not able to detect this misuse. Because until today, it's Citizens Lab, it's Amnesty Tech, it's other journalists who detect and who bring to the open this kind of misuse, and not the democratic control structures. So they have failed. And the last point is, what's with the victims? These governments or these agencies have all the information from the victims' homes, even going back to pictures that you have taken 10 years ago. Whereas victims, until today, don't even get the information whether they have been spied upon or not. And that is really out of proportion for everything. And then we have the situation that we in the European Union become complicit in the kind of crimes on human rights defenders happening through spyware elsewhere. Because sometimes it's European companies that export spyware to third countries. There was a German company doing that to Egypt, and we know what the Egyptian regime is doing. Also, that a lot of international companies either have their offices in the European Union or they have their finances flows going through the European Union. So we are complicit. And just by buying this kind of mercenary spyware, like Pegasus from others, even if it would only be used for legal, in a proper legal framework, we can become complicit because we give them the money that they need and the information and the kind of testing ground they need to improve the spyware that is then at the same time sold to authoritarian regimes. So taking all of that together, and there has been a first report published by the rapporteur Sophie Infeld, kind of bringing most of it together, being a bit weak on the country dimension. So on that, we will build more language, and the kind of discussions as we have them today help us with this one. It is quite clear that the system doesn't work. It doesn't work in the European Union and it doesn't work locally. And the tool is just too dangerous for it to be used in a system that doesn't work. So for us Greens, and now we have to see how the democratic discussions end up in the parliament, it is quite clear that we want the use of mercenary spyware to be stopped. So to have a moratorium, and then see how we can and how we have to improve the legal frameworks, the victim protection, the oversight bodies. And we decided also because of the intrusiveness of some of these spyware, where it can modify data on the victim's phone, where it can use the victim's phone to send messages to someone else, where it can go back over years, for example, to access information, that we need an international ban on this. So as we have an international ban, for example, on chemical weapons, because we just think it's too dangerous, we need an international ban on these most intrusive aspects of spyware. And at least for the European Union, we should stop using it until we have legal frameworks that are in accordance with our own laws. Because what is happening right now, and was just one of the hearings we had last week, where legal experts say what is happening right now is actually against European and international law in the European Union. We have to stop it and sort these things out. This is where we are now. And I would maybe just like to use the last round of interventions from everyone, Nancy, Hala, and also Ron, to get input from you on what we should fight for in this committee, in this work, based on the different perspectives and the different experience that you have. And maybe this time we can just start with Hala.
Till now, the problem for me that I couldn't access to justice. I couldn't put into accountability the entity who have done that. So it's the Jordanian government or the NSO, who own the Pegasus spyware. I couldn't go to court to ask for justice for myself or for others who were spied on. And this is not just because I don't trust the judicial system in Jordan, because the government will not confess that they have done that. So even I couldn't go to any European country because I don't hold another nationality. Maybe you can think to extend the universal jurisdiction to include such kind of cases to file cases against governments or the companies that have these such kind of spywares. Maybe this will be helpful. At least they will understand whoever do that, he will never get away with his murder, or his crime. So we can find cases in other countries in this case. I think maybe this will be helpful to the all victims. It's difficult for me as a lawyer. I couldn't file a case to go against the one who did that for me and for other human rights defenders and victims and activists and journalists in Jordan. And now in Jordan, there's a new news that there's still a new cases. So this is why, because we couldn't bring them to accountability. So now they still doing that, and they feel no one will go after them.
Thank you, Nancy, and for making the point that access to justice, holding the perpetrators accountable, and fighting the impunity that at the moment exists around the misuse of spyware is key. And it is quite a paradox situation that you alluded to very well. So it's a government that you think spied on you, and you need to rely on that government to bring to justice the misuse committed by the government. I mean, that system doesn't work, it's quite obvious. And you're absolutely right. We need to find different ways. Dual nationals sometimes have different ways because they can file cases in Europe. We have a number of cases, for example, where human rights defenders were surveyed, but for example, while they were in Belgium, so they can file that in front of the Belgian court. But we need to find for sure ways to bring to accountable also, well, cases such as yours. Maybe, Nancy, on your perspective of an organization that is trying to protect and support people who are victims of spyware.
Before that the need of awareness when it comes to how harmful civilians is need to be understood. I mean, in some cases, we're not only talking about defamation campaign and arrests, but also killings. I mean, and here, I mean, bringing in a women human rights defender from the MENA, sometimes like this kind of civilians can bring really people in danger, and this really needs. I mean, it's like a trigger to a lot more threats and difficulty for defenders. In general, I think we need to think of funding the well-being and the technical support the defender will need after such attacks, because it's a lot on the long run. This can destroy people's life. I mean, for a long time. And we need also to see publicly and privately that authorities that are targeting, that something is happening to them, that someone is telling them that there is a concern in them using this kind of surveillance. So for us, that's very important in order for us to kind of support a defender like Hala or other defenders. But you were saying something very important also before, is that actually the EU is funding and supporting the development of spyware, and this is something where we need to look at. I would rather have the EU use the global human rights sanction regime rather than funding the development of spyware. And as you were saying before, I think it's really important that the member states, as an example, do not use civilian tools against their own citizens, if they want to lead this. So this is, I think, something you wrote already, but I just wanted to underline how important that is.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And also thank you for raising again, the fact we need to create awareness. We need to make everyone understand also how detrimental the effects are and how widespread it is. So I hope our website can do some support in that. But you also alluded to the special dimension this has for women's human rights defenders. Because I know, especially in the Arab world, for example, pictures are used for smear campaigns against a woman's reputation, and if that reputation is damaged, it is damaged forever, with horror effects. Also, and spyware is supporting that the attacks are not just the individual human rights defender, but the relatives, the kids, the family, and what it does to them. And we know that a lot of these regimes deliberately target the family to get to the heart of what really bothers the human rights defenders. And I'm a mother myself, and just thinking that they will use my children to get to me. I mean, I make that decision for myself. If they do something to me, I have to bear it. Thinking that they do something to my children is just so cruel. And they do that on purpose. And spyware, of course, gives them another tool, and a very, very strong tool to do that. Also, thank you for raising the issue of funding the support for victims and for everything that they have to build up as alternative infrastructure, protective infrastructure. Thank you also, and that's a discussion we already had. Using the human rights sanctions regime, especially the targeted sanctions, also on spyware abuse and misuse, because it's a grave human rights violation, so it can be treated as such. So far, we didn't have a case, but clearly there has been some discussion. So we will keep this up. And also, again, yes, I mean, we have to lead by example, no double standards also here on the misuse of spyware. So thank you again for, like, if you point one finger, it's three point back. And that's also the case at the moment when we talk about spyware. And we have to improve the dual use regulation, or how it is used, which is the regulation that should prevent the export of spyware to these kind of regimes. And here I would say, again, linking it to the discussion of the moratorium, until we haven't fixed this whole mess, we just shouldn't export at all. And now, one from another, again, different perspective, your remarks on what we should pick up to, especially when it comes to the dimension of third countries.
Well, thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Nancy and Hala, for those comments. I won't repeat what has been said already, but I would like to zero in on one thing I think that European parliamentarians could be doing, which is close to my interests, and that is to encourage more research of the sort that Citizen Lab does. We are a small organization. It is a lot of work to do the type of research that we do. It involves highly specialized engineering skills. We were really excited to see Amnesty International develop their security lab a few years ago, but we are both relatively small, and we're challenged in terms of capacity. I noticed that in the Pegasus draft report, the PEGA committee draft report, and some references parliamentarians have made in the past, that there is a desire to see a European Citizen Lab. I think this would be fantastic. And what I would encourage you to think of is support for university-based research. Why university-based? Well, universities have a lot of resources typically, and there are many leading universities in Europe where you can imagine something like a Citizen Lab being developed. And also, universities typically have protections around academic freedom. I am a fully tenured professor. For what it's worth, that means I have an obligation to speak truth to power. Universities also have strict protocols around investigative techniques and research ethics. That means that we have to treat our interactions with victims very carefully. There's a lot that you can't do at the European Parliament level, but this is certainly one thing you can do, which is to encourage funding and resources for researchers at European universities to focus on abuses around mercenary surveillance technologies. There should be centers of expertise in places like Germany, Belgium, and elsewhere. So anything that we can do to assist in that effort, we'd be glad, because one of my goals as I enter into this phase of my career is to build out the digital accountability field in the university environment globally.
Thank you, John, also for all you did in your career, really spearheading. I mean, 20 years ago, we are talking on that issue now, like what, 2-3 years? 20 years ago, this whole issue, and bringing us actually just giving us the opportunity to see how we can better regulate it politically through the research and that you're doing, and also providing very concrete protection to people such as Hala, and to people such as Nancy, the tools to actually detect and prove what is happening. Yes, I mean, you said it. I think it's an amazing idea to create a European Citizens Lab dependance, however, and see also how we can build on the research being done, and how we can better fund the research being done in universities across European Union, because as you say, they are much more independent, and they have much more knowledge and in-depth expertise working on these issues for 20 years than, for example, a member of parliament such as me can ever develop. So just make use of these resources and pool it, and make also the close links. This is very important. And we realized it when we started the Pegasus committee. I have been working in the Gulf for a long time, so I was kind of aware that maybe I'm going to have that problem on my phone. But a lot of my colleagues kind of in shock realized, oh shit, I mean, now I'm a target, and what do I do if I think I'm a target? And then we started calling Citizens Lab, and so, but that's very cumbersome now. And that's where the idea was born. Why don't we have the kind of protective infrastructure? We then set it up to a small degree in the European Parliament, and it detected that. I mean, it was one of the things that sparked the Greek case. because it was a Greek member of the European Parliament that was surveyed and was just detected, because we have now created, for us few in the European Parliament, this infrastructure which should be available to all citizens of the European Union. And that is, I mean, I have a duty of care to citizens as a member of the European Parliament. So it is a very good recommendation, and I think it will pursue. So to sum this up, thank you, all three of you, for joining us, for doing our little part, another little part, in raising awareness about the problem and discussing some solutions, or little parts of solutions. I don't think I think it will take a while until we have a full solution to that, but we have to continue to bring together the pieces for the solutions. I hope everyone, also those watching us, will make use of the website as a resource to raise awareness and to better get to the bottom of the problem. And with you will share this widely, and it can serve as a resource for everyone who wants to know more or start more in-depth research. We will try to regularly update the website. So also, Ron, for example, if you think there are a few cases missing, if someone's watching for Amnesty Tech, or some victims who say, where's my case? Get in touch with us, and we will regularly update it, because I'm afraid, as Ron said, it's just the tip of the iceberg. We will see more revelations, but also hope that at one point we will come in front of the tide. So thank you, all three of you, for being with me today. I want to thank, well, the Greens for making this possible with the funding. And I would like to thank everyone who watched us here today, and stay tuned to what we do in the Pegasus Inquiry Committee and what happens elsewhere. Thank you very much, and have a good, well, morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are.
Thank you, Hannah.